Thank you, Dr. McManus. What a phenomenal presentation, and I've got lots of questions, but we're going to hold them for the time being, because I'd like now to introduce a man that might not need introduction, but I know we have some foreign nationals who were made Dublin their home in the audience. So I'm going to introduce Roddy Doyle. Roddy is a novelist, a dramatist, and a screenwriter, and he's also a Dubliner. Several of his books we know that have made it into iconic films. His first was The Commitments in 1991, and my favourite film, and I've said this on several occasions, is Snapper. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my heroes, Roddy Doyle.
Hello. When I talked to Art O'Leary just about a week and a half ago when he asked me to come here, I was absolutely thrilled. Just delighted to be included in this. I think it's a brilliant idea. The problem, I've been thinking about it virtually nothing else since, what is Dublin? And I think one of the problems with trying to define something is that it seems to exclude. I grew up on Kilbarrack Road. It's not far from here, on the north side. And those of us who grew up on the north side, given the choice, we'd probably exclude the south side from our definition of what Dublin is for the crack, you know. Only half seriously, but we'd let it happen for a fortnight or so, and then we'd let them back in, pretending we're reluctant. But on Kilbarrack Road, when I was a kid, actually the photographs reminded me of going with my parents to Stillorgan shopping centre just to see the shopping centre, which seems ludicrous now, but it was one of the 7 wonders of the world. And 2 other places I remember we went to when they were being built, Liberty Hall, you know, and we stood looking at this thing, Liberty Hall, Ireland's first skyscraper, as we called it back then. And again, we felt so modern. And the other one I recall, for different reasons, is the American Embassy in Ballsbridge. We weren't emigrating, you know, we'd no interest. My parents were very happily living in Dublin, and therefore so were we. It was the shape of the thing. And I remember we were laughing, like my sisters and my brother and my parents, just as we looked at the shape of the American, like there were more than 4 walls, which just seemed ludicrous, you know. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Kilbarrack Road, which was a very quiet road at the time and is now kind of like a main road to the airport. But my house was in Dublin 5. And when we crossed the road, we were in County Dublin. And there was a sort of magic about that, you know, that you cross and you went from one place into another place. But I've got to say, I never felt any less of a Dubliner when I crossed the road. And there was a farm on the other side of the road. And the farmers, the people, the family, the Floods, they had Dublin accents, you know. And we must remember that there are and there were farmers with Dublin accents. But I was thinking again of my parents a bit, and again growing up, and the phrase or the word town. And I wondered, is that what Dublin's about? Or what is that people who refer to Dublin, the city centre, as town? That's Dublin. Will we go into town? Where are you? I'm in town. You know, I suppose then, I'm told, a friend of mine whose sisters live in Skerry say they go talk about going into Dublin. And again, I'm not suggesting that we exclude Skerries from our definition of Dublin. It's not a bad idea, though, when you think about it. Bit of crack again. But I think it's an emotional thing more than something you can map. And I used to be a geography teacher. I have a degree in geography. I love maps. I pore over them all the time. But there was one a couple of months ago. This is getting closer to the core of what I think Dublin is. A couple of months ago, I was getting off the bus, the 1:30 bus on Talbot Street, outside the Irish Life Centre. And like we all do, I said thank you. The woman in front of me said thank you to the driver. I said thank you. And I was stepping off the bus when a young man behind me said, "Driver, that was flawless." I don't know if you know the 1:30 bus. I mean, it's an easy route. I mean, I think the driver, he's one right-hand turn at Amiens Street. But for that second, he became Tom Hanks landing a plane with no engines on a frozen river, you know. It was the funniest thing. The driver burst out laughing. I burst out laughing. And I was thinking about it later as I was walking down Talbot Street, feeling so happy to have experienced that. Like, it was driver, that was flawless. Four standard words that aren't slang, aren't unique to Dublin in any way. And I was thinking, well, you could hear that. It's easy to imagine that happening in Liverpool, for example, those of you who know Liverpool, or Glasgow, Northern English or Scottish towns, places where they speak English, big Irish side to it, and we can get sentimental about that. But I was thinking that could happen anywhere, really, but actually it couldn't, because they don't thank the driver in other cities. I thanked a bus driver in London once, and he looked at me as if I was a terrorist. He was really frightened. You know, was I thanking him because this was the last time he was going to be thanked by anybody? But it was just, so it is in its way unique to Dublin. The opportunity that young man had to make us laugh. I don't know if he knew the driver, but it was just the funniest thing. And as I walked up Talbot Street, I was just feeling so glad I came from the same city, that to a degree I shared the same accent, the same geography as he did. And Talbot Street, to me, captures so much of what Dublin and any thriving city should be, and struggling city. Because you're walking down, you've got Guineas on one side. If you're walking up the street, actually, towards O'Connell Street, you've got Guineas on one side and a mosque on the other side. Culchis and Arabs. The brilliant mix, which any city needs. And I reluctantly, or not reluctantly, but out loud, quite recently admitted that a big part of my job is just wandering around and gawking. I have an office, I have two offices actually, but they're only part of my job. And I think if I was to try and capture Dublin, my Dublin, I'd stand on Talbot Street, because it's actually a work in progress and always has been throughout my life. Just when you think you have it pinned down, oh, that's the type of place it is, it defies you and becomes a different kind of place. And I think so much of Dublin is like that. Met my daughter in Kilmainham recently, and I was walking back into town along, James's Street, and again, a work in progress. Guinness's been there forever. In the Children's Hospital, it's like they're after moving, football stadium and plonking it in the middle of the Liberties there somehow or other. And it's an extraordinary shift and weave. And I think that essentially is what Dublin is to me about. It's the words, really, and the words that people bring into the city and people who have been in the city for generations keep and use and discard. And the connections between the words and the streets. And when I was talking to Art, I remembered a piece I wrote. I can't remember why I wrote it or who asked me to write it. It's very short and it's called Dublin is a Sound. And I think it's going to be no practical help to you whatsoever. And Jim used the word factual early on, that all contributions will be factual. No. I don't, as a fiction writer as opposed to a faction writer, I wanted to run when I heard factual, because the word terrifies me, really. It scares me. So this isn't at all factual in a way, but it's an emotional response to what I think Dublin is. You can't map it, but I think it's a vital part of what you are doing, and I really admire what you're doing. So it's called Dublin is a Sound. I edited it a bit to make it less rooted in the time. I wrote it about 10 or 11 years ago, so hopefully it doesn't feel too dated. Dublin is a city of words. It has a couple of buildings that are worth leaning against, and it sits right beside the sea, even in the sea when the weather is rough. The mountains are near, but as mountains go, they're on the flat side. And there's the Liffey. It's Guinness's secret ingredient, but other than that, it's a bit of a disappointment. I'm not being honest here, I'm probably being stupid. Dublin has its glory, and in many meanings of the word, it is lovely. But I want to emphasise the point. I want to put down as my belief, Dublin is not a place. Dublin is a sound. Dublin is the sound of people talking. Dublin City is the sound of people who love talking, people who love words, who love taking words and playing with them, twisting and bending them, making short ones longer and long ones shorter, people who love inventing words and giving fresh meanings to old ones. The Eskimos might have many words for snow, but Dubliners need only two. Fucking snow. In Dublin, there are many words for saying hello. Hello, how are you? How are you? All right, how's it going? How's things? How's tricks? There's the man, here's the man, how's the woman? What's the story? Story. Most of them carry a question mark, some of them even demand an answer. What's the story? It's an extraordinary question to be asked several times a day. More a challenge than a greeting, as if the city is shoving you into becoming a talker, a raconteur, a writer. You don't get past until you deliver a half-decent tale. Something worth listening to and passing on. When I was a teacher and came across a gang of kids huddled in a corner of the schoolyard, smelling of cheerful guilt and cigarette smoke, I'd often ask them, what's the story here? They understood. I was inviting them to talk their way out of trouble. They very rarely let me down. I've seen silent children in other parts of the world. They terrify me. Dublin kids come with a buzz. I read a story recently written by a 15-year-old boy. The word buzz was in every second or third line, but it was never used in exactly the same way. The buzz, a buzz, buzzing up. It was like watching the creation of new life, limbs and features being tested and made firm. Not long ago, a group of young women explained to me what a house hatcher is. The term had come into a piece of dialogue they'd just written. He used to be a bit of a house hatcher, but he's more out than in these days. A house hatcher is a boy or girl, more often a boy, who stays at home all day, won't come out because he's too into the Xbox. The job description, house hatcher, might not have originated in Dublin, but a bit of a house hatcher couldn't come from anywhere else. I'm being sentimental, I know. Occasionally I've seen Dublin kids not talking. You can walk for days through the city without being asked, what's the story? But my point is this. Rents are impossible. Buying is more than impossible. We've been through a rough time, and we seem to be heading into a different, even rougher time. Dublin people can't afford to live in Dublin. People are afraid to breathe, to exhale. Something else will be taken away. But the people of Dublin will always own their words. And Dublin will thrive because Dublin is the city that never shuts up. And I've just one little idea, and it was my wife reminded me that I'd had the idea a while back. It's nothing to do with what you're doing, but I'd like to plant it anyway as a possibility. A museum of sound for Dublin. And I think it's I Googled, did a quick Google, and I don't think there is such a place. There have been exhibitions that have been devoted to sound, but I don't think there is a museum of sound. And to me, Dublin would be the ideal place for it. And I think there should be a room devoted to seagulls. Thank you.